fateful hour of 11 has struck, and Britain's final warning to Hitler having been ignored, a state of war once more exists between Great Britain and Germany.
The onset of World War II dramatically changed the tendencies. Rinkers were called up for military service, while many Londoners, businesses and institutions were evacuated to escape the anticipated bombing raids. But movement wasn't one way, as arrivals made the Regent Hall their new home. One of these transfers was Eric Rapp, who arrived in 1939 following the closure of his home corps, and who went on to serve in the Royal Air Force.
The war impacted the ring. Well, it certainly compacted it. I mean, it reduced in size. We used to have a lot of servicemen coming in to play with us. There was an RAF officer training centre in St John's Wood, and we used to get a regular influx of people from there, and so it was a changing scene all the time.
Women also played their part and were busy on the home front to help the nation in the war effort.
The war had broken out, and I was of national service age to do registration. I didn't want to go into the ATS and I didn't want to go into munitions, so I decided to come up on Red Shield work. And I worked at King's Cross, the big canteen. There were two canteens there, and this one was open 24 hours a day. And I worked from 8 at night till 8 in the morning, 6 days a week. I nearly always had Saturday evenings off, so that enabled me to come to the rink on Sundays, although the war was on. So I spent most of my day here on Sundays and used to leave the meeting about 7:30 if it was still going on, in order to get to King's Cross at 8 o'clock.
The Blitz began in autumn 1940, but rinkers were determined to keep the Sunday meetings running as much as possible. Despite Londoners trying to maintain their normal way of life, the horrors of war were never far away.
The side by the officers' room was all heavily sandbagged, in fact from floor to ceiling, and we used to have some meetings in the side hall behind the sandbags, and it was very difficult days.
As a child growing up at the Regent Hall, Major Beryl Warren, the daughter of Frank and Lottie, experienced first-hand the effects of war.
Whether the sirens had gone or not, my father said we'd go to worship every Sunday, and I just accepted. So every Sunday we would come to worship, whether the air raid was on, whether the bombs were falling, we would be there, and the people would be there. But I'd gone up with my harvest basket full of lovely fruit. We used to bring big baskets of fruit, the children, and we carried this on the train. And when we got to Oxford Street, it was all cordoned off, because I don't know whether it's where John Lewis is now, I can't remember, but it had all been bombed in the night, and the debris and the smoke, the fire engines, the police were all there, and we couldn't get into the hall. But the officer was there, and over the cordon, he was allowed through the cordon. They took my harvest basket, and we all had to turn around and go home.
We had one year, I remember, a visit by the staff band, the annual visit of the staff band, and that previous night there had been a heavy bombing raid, and a landmine had been dropped that had landed in Oxford Street. So Oxford Street was out, So we were all turning up for our usual 10 o'clock business, and we were diverted to Marylebone SA Hall. And I remember we had quite a nice day at Marylebone, but all squashed in.
One Sunday morning, news was coming through that the British battleship I think it was one of the largest ships we had, the Hood, had been sunk by the German battleship, the Bismarck. Over 1,000 people, the crew, had all lost their lives. I think only a handful survived, and the corps officer's son was one of those that lost their lives. And of course we didn't have television. The news was coming through, and we gathered that Sunday morning, and I can just feel there was this air of gloom and despondency. The major's son has been lost, and it sort of hit me. Terrible.
In 1944, Hitler unleashed his deadliest bombs yet, the V2 rockets, or Doodlebugs.
And I well remember one Sunday morning, we had Major and Mrs. Holland were our officers here at the time, and Mrs. Holland was on the platform conducting a song, and Doodlebug went over and evidently dropped quite near, and the glass over in the rink came falling through, and one of the bandsmen, Vic Cowlin I think it was, he was home on leave. He went to the band room, got a broom and swept up all the glass, and then Mrs. Holland got back onto the platform again, and she said, well, we'll continue where we left off, we'll have the next verse of the song. And it was those peaceful hours I once enjoyed, how sweet their memories still, which caused a bit of a laugh, and so we carried on with the meeting after that as if nothing had happened.
The Allies triumphed and war ended in 1945. With peace declared, men and women returned home from military service, and new faces appeared at Regent Hall.
Generally, there was a spirit of thankfulness that the awful war had finished. I mean, the consistent loss of life, loss of property, homes being wrecked and all that kind of thing. It's quite, depressing when you're in it. And even with the nightly bombing, the bombing raids, it does have an effect on you. And yeah, that was one of the things of relief that it was all over.
On the 64th Corps anniversary, in March 1946, the Regent Hall received a royal command from King George VI to perform in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace.
The first time the band was invited to Buckingham Palace after the war, we had a band of about 50 marching down the Mall across the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, and we were all in our service uniform. So you've got Navy, Army and Air Force men as well as Salvationists. And the picture appeared in the Times, and the report was that the Brigade of Guards couldn't have been smarter. So that was the first time I remember.
With post-war recovery at full pace, drinkers embraced the opportunity to renew their outreach in the West End.